Hi, welcome to the Hey Cowboy YouTube channel. We got quite a video for you here today. I'm coming out of the closet so that I can make you a brand new YouTube video. Today we're talking about House Flipper. I'm gonna see if I can flip a house. I've been working out a little bit, so I'm feeling pretty strong. House Flipper is a game where what do you do in House Flipper? You clean garbage and you eat bugs. So we're gonna see how much of that I can do today. Anyways, I've been in this closet for far too long, and that changes now. So join me as we learn all sorts of things about the realism of House Flipper, and we're gonna talk about construction and stuff. Come on, you gotta go in the basement with me. You gotta come down to the basement. The first House Flipper is a game where you make money by cleaning houses, painting them, getting rid of junk and old furniture, adding in new furniture, as well as changing up the layout. Sometimes you're adding or destroying walls. You're generally filling in customers' requests for what they want changed in their house. Otherwise, you can also buy your own houses and then renovate them and sell them on the market. As far as renovating the houses themselves, you can buy houses that are in a variety of different conditions. Some of them are pretty bad off, while others aren't in terrible condition and just kind of need some updating. I thought it was really cool that in the game there actually is a house that was damaged in a fire. Get to use a little bit of my fire restoration knowledge. When I first walked up to it, the railing in front of the house was all burnt to a char. When you walk inside, everything is sooty and smoky. It has kind of that feeling of a real house fire. One thing right away that doesn't seem quite as realistic though is that all the windows are still intact. Generally, if a house fire is going to get pretty hot, windows are going to crack and explode under the heat, but maybe this wasn't a fire that got that hot. In fact, I was a little bit thrown off because I thought it was insulation all over the floor at first, but actually this is not insulation on the floor in this fire. It seems to be just dirt itself, as you're able to lay new flooring over top of it without having to additionally clean it, which is kind of weird since it implies that there is literally no foundation under here. Now, if a house was built just on the ground without a basement or anything, there still would have to be either a foundation or a post and beam structure to raise it up off of the ground. There needs to be some sort of separation from the earth itself. When wood or a lot of materials are touching dirt, they tend to degrade pretty fast. This is why you will lay down concrete foundations to put your posts in and then raise the home off of that. You could also have it directly be laid out on a concrete slab itself, but that's a little bit less common. It can also get pretty tricky because then a lot of your utilities will be set in that concrete. Having your plumbing run through it is just terrible. If something goes wrong, you're ending up having to destroy all this concrete to relay pipe. It's awful. Before you can actually start to restore anything, you're gonna have to mitigate, which the game does have in the form of cleaning and getting rid of all the trash. You're mucking out any debris that's left by, but you also need to remove any wet materials that are left over. In the case of drywall or plaster and lath, often this means having to cut out whole sections of the wall. You're gonna need a lot of big fans and dehumidifiers to suck all of that moisture out and make sure that nothing is molding before you start putting in new materials. In addition to this fire restoration, there is also a flooded house that you can buy, something that I'm actually even more personally familiar with than the house fire. For the most part, the flooded house is actually a pretty good example of what a real flooded house looks like. Again, this is kind of an uncanny experience. You can see the water line on the walls of how high everything got, and yeah, that's pretty accurate. A lot of this looks like how a flooded house does look. Water restoration is pretty similar to fire, just that you don't have to deal with the invasive smoke that kind of gets everywhere. The biggest thing is you need to get rid of all the wet materials that can't be dried out and then ensure that everything is completely dry. I go a lot more into water restoration in my 5 Nights at Freddy's video, which I kind of can't believe I'm saying that sentence, but yeah, I made a video about restoring the 5 Nights at Freddy's Pizzeria, and I go pretty in-depth, maybe too in-depth into water restoration at the start of the video, so if you want to hear me talk about it, go watch that. I'm not going to do it all over again. What I can say though is that the method of repairing these walls using plaster is sure realistic for the walls that are plaster, but it's obviously absurd for the walls that are tile or for the exterior, which is most likely vinyl. Also, the exterior vinyl would probably be fine. Flooding doesn't really damage vinyl. The only reason I'd think you'd maybe need to repair it is if water is trapped behind it, which is pretty unlikely. Most of the water is going to be inside your walls. Again, this differs from masonry, but in homes that are framed with wood studs, you're going to have insulation between them. Often here in the US, this is bat insulation, which is like fiberglass, or there's other kinds. There's like denim insulation now. All of these things that help keep heat or cool inside or outside of your home. A lot of these materials are very absorbent and will trap in water, meaning if they get flooded, you just have to pull them out. But the way that you pull them out is most likely going to be through the inside of the house, not the exterior. If you're removing it from the exterior, you have to take off the siding, you're going to have to take off house wrap if you have that, you're going to have to take off sheathing underneath that. It's going to be super tedious, and most likely if your insulation is wet, the materials on the inside of your house are also wet, and you're already going to have to do some sort of flood cut to remove that. So not very realistic, kind of absurd. One thing worth noting is that the developers of the game are from Poland, and I'm from the US. So how construction is different in these two countries is something that I'm not entirely sure. Right away, of course, more of their buildings are constructed using masonry. They're brick and stone, versus in the US, everyone likes to clown on us for our cardboard houses where you just have studs with drywall put up over them. There's pros and cons to both systems. A big pro of drywall is that personally, I think it's a little bit more fun to demo. I'm starting to really get in the spirit of the game, and I feel like it's time for me to do some renovations of my own. Now, I recently moved in with my partner, who actually happens to own the house that we live in, and there are a lot of weird little projects that I said I would take on, so what better time than in the middle of a video to do some home renovation? Let's get in the spirit of the game. Come on, people. I spend most of my day in the basement working, and this thing is the bane of my existence. I can't tell you how many times I've smacked my head on this thing going up or down the stairs. The way that this house was originally constructed, there's a closet up here outside of the bathroom, and normally this bottom shelf is not a shelf. Normally there's just a box in this style of house so that you have enough clearance so that people with big heads like me can go up and down the stairs. But the genius who owned this home previously did a lot of very fun renovations. And by fun, I mean, like, why would you do those? So this is one that I'm going to undo. The more observant of you in the audience may go, "Hey, Cowboy, your outfit is different." And that's because what you just saw a second ago was filmed at least a week ago. I got a little sidetracked on other projects, some of which you can see now, because I actually finished a project. I got a little caught up working on stuff in the kitchen instead. I decided to redo the butcher block countertops. Previous homeowner, love him to death, great guy. Never met him. He decided to use the butcher block as a cutting board, so they'd been soaking up like oil and grease and presumably meat fluid for months to years to their entire life, and they had deep knife gouges in them and stains, and I just couldn't stand it anymore, so I decided to refinish them. Some of the deeper cuts I was not able to get out, unfortunately, but I would say generally it's pretty night and day with how they looked before and how they look now. And there's been a giant hole in this closet for far too long, so we'll get working on that eventually. Most of what you're actually doing in the house is going to be painting walls, putting in new flooring, and then changing around the furniture. It's interesting to me that the walls themselves kind of get a lot of attention. Painting is a slower process, but putting down flooring is super fast. It's really just kind of like you just toss it on there. Basically the same way that you would do it in The Sims. And I will say, from my experience in real life, it's kind of flipped. Painting is a lot easier than doing flooring. Generally, you're going to need an empty room to start with. And then, depending on which kind of flooring you're working with, all of them have their own little challenges. Carpeting, which I've never installed, you have to measure kind of perfectly, and if it's a bigger room, you have to deal with different rolls meeting up so that you have the correct layout and correct distance for every single room. If you're putting down something like LVP, that's not too challenging, it's just kind of tedious. It's a lot of work. You gotta make sure that they're laid out in a way that the pattern isn't really obvious and you don't have too short of segments meeting up to the walls. There's a lot of little requirements, and the way that you lay it out is kind of reversed of how you're thinking about it. It's hard to describe, but it's kind of tedious and it's a lot more involved than the way it is in the game. Additionally, the game has no interest in dealing with things like priming or texturing. If you have drywall or plaster, there's different levels of finishes that you can have, some that are smoother, some that have more bumps and are more forgiving. There's things like orange peel and knockdown texturing, which change how a wall looks. I will say when you get up close to a wall, you can at least see that there is a level of texture, which is nice, makes things look a little bit less flat. You're not dealing with really any trim work in the game, no baseboard, no shoe, no casing around the doors. Everything is pretty simple. Frankly though, for a game of this style, I'm actually pretty impressed with how much detail there is. I expected it to be a lot simpler when I started out. The game does have more similarities to The Sims than I would expect though. There's a larger emphasis on the furniture that you put in the houses, how you lay out rooms, and the smaller details. While the electrical and plumbing detail overall is more involved than I thought it would be, there is one kind of big element that it's lacking that I think is a little disappointing. When you start doing any electrical or plumbing work, there's no mechanic for shutting things off, which is pretty important. While there is no requirement to shut off power, there is actually a fuse box in the game, which I think is interesting. These things aren't really used realistically. This is an electric panel. It's very similar to a fuse box in that this is the main distribution center for all of the energy to the rest of the house. Inside of it, there are individual little circuits that go to different parts, different outlets, whatever needs power in your house, lights. Generally, they're sorted by rooms, although with older houses, sometimes you get weird things patched in and it doesn't exactly make sense. But anyways, before you would start doing any work on anything electrical, you'd come down here or to your fuse box and you would find whichever switch is giving power to that part of the house. You'd turn it off, go up with a multimeter and make sure that there's actually not power running there before you start doing any work to make sure that you don't get shocked. While we're down here though, come on, let's check in on one of the projects I'm working on. All right, so since I have cut open and removed the bottom shelf from the closet, it's kind of just been an open gap for the last week, so it's time that I actually get working on fixing that up. Now, I did ask for some suggestions on YouTube and I got some very creative ideas back from people, some of which I might try in the future. For now, I need something a little bit less ambitious that will still fill that space, and also I'd like it to look a little bit cool. I'd like to do something creative with it and not just put up some plain boards. I ended up taking a little bit of inspiration from barn squares. They're these like quilt square patterns that you'll see on the side of barns sometimes when you're driving around in the country. So I ended up landing on this design, just a simple kind of heart. I think it'll be maybe simple enough that I can actually do it, but still look interesting in the final product. Now I've got this. This is just part of a board that I got from Habitat for Humanity. I think it's maybe pine. I'm not really good at identifying wood yet, but hopefully it's enough material because I don't really want to do the math on whether or not it is. Let's get chopping. As far as changing the walls goes, there isn't really any concern for what is and isn't structural. A big important thing when you're changing the layout of your house is whether or not a wall is load bearing. Generally, this is going to be something you're going to want a structural engineer to check out and confirm whether or not weight is being held on these walls. If you have a multi-storied home, it's incredibly important. If you've got like a ranch or a single-story house, there's not going to be as many load bearing walls probably, but there's still going to be walls that are supporting your roof and the trusses above them. The game has no interest in that. Another thing that you'd realistically have to consider with renovations is pulling permits. Depending on where you live, there are probably local municipality rules and maybe larger state or federal government rules regarding what you can actually change in your house and how you can change it. This varies widely from place to place, but a lot of jurisdictions will have rules surrounding what is and isn't a bedroom and where a bedroom can and can't be. When it comes to like home listings, you'll often see places where it looks like there's a bedroom bedroom in the basement, but they maybe legally can't say that due to requirements such as having to have an egress window. Often it's from a city or a county government that you'll need to get permission from before you can actually start to do these renovations. Some of it makes sense, some of it's just kind of bureaucratic nonsense. A very real issue you might run into if you were someone flipping a house is having something go wrong. One thing the game doesn't really touch on at all is risk. If you were to actually buy a house to try and flip it, there is actually a lot of risk that you'd be taking on. The biggest thing is structural concerns. The game doesn't really have any interest in talking about foundation or major issues with houses. Versus if you were looking in real life, probably a big reason why a lot of the houses would potentially be cheap enough to make a profit on would be that there's big underlying issues. Major issues like foundation or joist issues or larger electrical problems can cost tens of thousands of dollars, making this whole process not as straightforward as it seems. Additionally, you might not be buying these houses with cash. You're probably not. And if you're buying a house that has major issues or isn't up to code in certain respects, you might not be able to get a loan with a traditional bank. And if you're buying a house that's already like gutted to the studs or has major issues with it, banks just don't really want anything to do with that. It's probably a big part of why the game just has you paying outright in cash, so you don't have to worry about financing anything. But there are other financing options that actually do exist for this sort of thing. They're shorter term loans meant for people who are doing renovations or flipping houses. But part of the conditions of it being shorter term is that, as far as I understand, they can sometimes be kind of a reasonable but high rate for the first year, and if you don't hit certain points with them, they can skyrocket, where essentially you're on the hook for paying tons of money. It's kind of like a loan shark deal, but the idea is you work fast enough and you get it sold in time so that you don't end up getting on the hook for those huge interest payments. But the game has no interest in foundation or dealing with anything major that could go wrong. Really, it's kind of an ideal dream for anyone who just wants to make the number go up. And one thing that the game really highlights is that the best way to make more money is to have more money. Now, it's been a minute since I worked on the actual heart project. I got a little bit distracted by a different project, which I don't know if I've mentioned or not at this point, but I'm making kitchen shelves. So I've got this big old piece of hickory. There's two of them, but I don't think I can hold two of them at the same time. And it's basically just gonna give some extra room in the kitchen for storage. Now that I have all of my squares cut down, squared away, as well as mitered, so I have the actual shape of the heart taking place, I'm gonna stain those as well as staining these shelves, and hopefully everything's just gonna come together perfectly. Along with not having to worry about the long-term cost of financing your renovation, there's really no thought or consideration given to the cost of utilities while you're working on a house. Owning the home, you would have to pay for all the electric, water, sewer, whatever utilities you need for as long as you're working on the home. This would be a consistent cost, and the longer that you're working on a house, the more this would add up. Something that could be an interesting way to kind of up the difficulty in the game, making those profit margins a little bit thinner, making you incentivized to work faster so that you get more money. One feature that I really wish was in the game is that I wish you could hire other people. Pretty much every house flipper I've ever met while I was working in restoration or real estate has always done the process through a lot of people that they know. It's a very kind of social job in that way. If you're trying to get things for cheap, you gotta know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy. And I think it'd be cool if there was some element of this in the game. I really don't enjoy the painting mechanics that much, so I wish I could hire my friend's brother Billy and have him do it instead of me. I think that would be a nice little feature. Along with that, another very real consideration in this process is offloading liability. This is a concept I learned about working in restoration, where essentially you're trying to make it not your fault if something goes wrong. This is done through hiring other people for higher risk parts of the job. The biggest one being plumbing. A lot of people who could potentially do plumbing on jobs are not doing it themselves because there's so much risk involved involved if something does go wrong. If you have a fitting that pops off or something leaks, it could potentially lead to tens of thousands of damage depending on how many rooms and areas it affects. The only time I've personally worked on a house flip was helping a family member renovate a condo. It was essentially a hoarder's house and they bought it as is. It was full of stuff. In fact, I can show you the critter that I got from it. But partway through this process, one of the fittings on a supply line in the kitchen sink blew off and essentially caused a flood. Now, my family member who was working on this condo was gone for a couple hours, and when he went back, there were like 4 inches of standing water. The worst part is, this is a second floor condo connected to like 7 other units, and a thing about water is that it doesn't really stay in one place. It kind of goes everywhere. So this upper condo, of course, floods the unit below it. It floods the units next to it. This water just goes everywhere. Suddenly, it's not just this unit that's flooded, it's at least like 3 other people's, if not more. That's a lot of money. The unit below, their ceiling has completely collapsed. Now, thankfully, he was not the person who put this fitting on. He hired a plumber to do the job, someone completely qualified, but this plumber, for some reason, installed the wrong fitting. I don't know why. Maybe he just made a mistake. Maybe it slipped his mind. Maybe he's done this a bunch of times and this was the first time something went wrong. Either way, the fault now rests with the plumber. Pretty much any legitimate trade worker is going to have insurance. So now it is up to that person's insurance to pay out for all of this massive amount of damage. I've written estimates for water losses like this before, and they immediately, just for the mitigation, are tens of thousands of dollars. And that can be for just a single unit. For multiple units affected, just the mitigation is probably going to be at least 6 figures, plus you add in the reconstruction. I mean, the unit below that had their ceiling destroyed, God, it sucks. It's awful. And if my family member had done this work himself and made this mistake on his own, it would have been his fault. If he had insurance, maybe the insurance would cover a certain amount of that. And this is why offloading liability is so important. Make that someone else's problem. You say, hey, I didn't touch any of the pipes in this house. It's this guy's fault. At the end of the day, while it feels a little bit like a greasy concept, this offloading liability, I'm not responsible for anything. What it really is just making sure that the high risk things are done by professionals, people who are really qualified to do it. Also, you may be thinking, this is kind of a weird angle. Why are you so low down here? I just wanted to show off my shelves. Look, I finished my shelves. They're done. 2 of them. Bam! They can hold things. They're on the wall. I don't really think shelves need to do anything more than that. How about that closet? Well, I've hit some small road bumps. The first hiccup was that I realized the initial stain pattern that I was gonna use didn't like that. Thankfully, I picked up a third, was able to restain it, found a pattern I like more. Then, you know how I said I wasn't gonna measure? Well, I ended up being inches short of having enough material to do my original plan. Literally inches. We gotta improvise, adapt, overcome, and I have a different idea, but also really trying to get this video out on Friday, and it is Wednesday night, and stain takes time to dry, glue takes time to dry, so I'm really kind of pushing the deadline here on whether or not I'm actually gonna finish this project or not. Well, that's enough yapping. Let's go get crapping. Feel free to look at the shelves a little bit longer. I'm gonna go down to the basement, you know? I'll see you guys later. While the game does kind of have an overemphasis on furnishing and decorating houses properly and appeasing customers, you can kind of just ignore all of that if you want to. I found a good amount of success from just getting rid of all the trash, cleaning, and painting everything white. And that way, it's a pretty good representation of a real house flipping market. If you've ever toured a flipped house before in real life, you'll know they're kind of just the most bleak, depressing houses you can look at. There's absolutely no character, and that's kind of the point. It makes sense because you're trying to appeal to the most people possible. And in that way, House Flipper really is completely backwards from real life. The game presents all these specific people as if you're trying to cater to them. And I guess in the case of a buyer's market, things would be more like that. But lately, at least in America, it has been nothing but a seller's market. And it's kind of always going to be that way as long as supply is so limited. But even if it was a buyer's market, they're not going to get this specific where you're putting in a bookshelf just to try and get this one person to bid more. Instead, the way you're going to go about flipping a house is you're going to make it the most appealing to the broadest amount of people possible. It's not about appealing to individuals whatsoever. It's about appealing to the most individuals through being the most generic and mass appealing. That means white and gray or whatever the style of the time is. This is going to change from decade to decade, but I think unfortunately we've maybe figured it out with just bland. It's hard to imagine that styles are going to change back to being fun and exciting in the kind of corporate dystopia that we've entered into. When it comes to a lot of these things, you can view them positively or negatively. I don't really care. A lot of them are just sort of realities, and sometimes reality is just kind of a bummer. It's a lot more fun to see houses with character, but most people selling a house aren't going to risk you really disliking blue stopping them from making more money. I do think it makes sense that House Flipper is a game though. It's not meant to be some sort of bleak commentary on the world of house flipping. It's meant to be something fun, and most people aren't going to be that interested in just cleaning a house and painting it white and then making number go up. It's a lot more fun if you look at all the weird, different, wacky furniture and options that they have. And clearly that's the successful model when you look at the slew of DLC that now exists for the game. Ultimately, I would say House Flipper is a game that gets very close to reality but never manages to stay there for any sustained period of time. There's elements like the plumbing or electrical installation that feel pretty real until you start to think about them too much. Some of the pricing is like, yeah, that's how much paint should cost, and then you look at the cost of an exterior door and it's way cheaper than you would ever find in real life. So would this game be able to teach you anything in real life? If you want to use it for some sort of real life application, you could probably recreate your house in it and then use that as sort of a mood board, a vision board for what you want your renovation to look like. Just don't really think about anything deep in terms of structural changes or wiring or plumbing or anything like that, because if you do want to do those changes, you're gonna have to talk to an actual professional. But what about the projects I set out to do in my own house? Did I complete the one thing that I wanted to do at the outset of this video? Yeah, I did. I actually did. It was kind of a late night last night doing some staining and cutting and gluing everything together so that I could actually install it today, but we got there. You can see it, kind of. It's not fully finished in that I haven't actually screwed it into the wall yet. I still need to do some trim around the bottom of it so that there's not a little gap that still drops down to the basement, but I'm pretty happy with what I have here. It was just a fun project to get more familiar with my tools and just make something. I think the best way that you can learn to do anything is just through doing it, practicing, taking on slightly too ambitious projects, and then trying to see them through. And it was pretty fun to do it along the way. House Flipper is a fun game. I enjoyed it a lot. I would like to play the sequel at some point. I didn't really touch on that much throughout the video, but I didn't play the second one yet. So if things are different, or if that completely destroys any argument about anything that I make in this video, I guess I'm glad I didn't play it then, because then I wouldn't have had anything to talk about. Feel free to leave a comment if House Flipper 2 is something that I should check out. If there's a different building or construction game that you think would be interesting for me to look at, feel free to comment that below. But thank you to my patrons who helped make this video possible, behind the scenes of some videos, other bonus content over there. I'm gonna drink this big bottle of skooma this next week, so that's gonna be going up on Patreon. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.